That's okay. No worry.
I just saw that. I
No,
didn't
that's okay.
see that before. No, no, no. Okay. So today we are going to talk a little bit about the idea of modernism and a counter to this kind of uh, universal modernity which was going on everywhere, which was um, sort of spreading its tentacles all over the world, and how different places, especially India, I mean, we are now going to talk about India mostly, but how through different ways and different means there was a counter to that. I mean, there were lots of counters to that. I mean, postmodernism was one of the strongest anti-modern movements in that sense, and this kind of universalism of modernism was, you know, um, was in some sense, although we revere, we sort of look up to the early modernists, when it started spreading all over the world, it did become something that people in the end did not like so much. I mean, there were certain interesting phases of it, brutalism in the US. Uh, and other places now. I mean, for an example, if I tell you guys, IIT Chicago, where I stayed there for 3 years in SR Crown Hall, which is Mies van der Rohe's most important building, has been voted consistently. And since I was there 24 years, 20, almost 20, 22 years back, since that time, or even before that, as the ugliest campus in the US. Now, if you imagine that, um, that what we consider the Graham Foundation Library, the SR Crown Hall, and all the other buildings, the and you know has been seen as an ugly building, compared to, let's say, the large university campuses and things like that. So the legacy of modernism is very questionable in that sense, in the way it spread everywhere. So what we will do is, we'll talk about, in some sense, the death of modernism and the beginning of other things. So what happens is, this is Pruitt Ego. Okay, this is a housing complex in St. Louis, built in 1956, one of the first large housing complex built by Minoru Yamasaki, who designed the World Trade Center, which were famously demolished not demolished, which were attacked by those airplanes on 2011, um, and 9/11. Sorry. And he also designed the Museum of Modern Art in New York, a very famous architect, and he designed this housing complex, extremely modern, extremely new way of living in the US, where everybody used to live in these townhouses, small houses, local neighborhoods, and suddenly this springs up as a very modernist monument, and in literally 5 to 6 years it became a ghetto for black people. It became crime ridden. It became uh, a very bad place to stay. And in 1972, they actually demolished it. And I will just show you a small 3 or 4 minute video on this, it's very interesting, just to talk about the development of that at the height of modernism and this kind of universal modernism, and how what it led to in terms of social fabric, social infrastructure, social conditions, cultural conditions, and what led to its demise. And this is famously known as the moment when modernism died in the world, in some sense. Wait, I'll share another window. I'll stop sharing this and it's on another window. Hold on. Can you hear?
No, Nimish, we can't.
Wait.
I think you have to include computer audio when you start sharing. I think that's not done.
Okay, one second. Where is that? Device settings. Where does that happen?
No, so when you share your screen,
Okay.
when the window appears ना, that time
Mm-hmm.
you get this share content के बाजू में लिखा है
Ah,
include.
okay, okay, okay. Correct,
Yeah,
correct, correct. Can you see now? Okay, you can see, I'm sure.
yeah,
Ground,
yeah,
they
yeah, we
can
can.
live.
Yeah, wait.
Live with indoor plumbing, electric lights, fresh plastered walls, and the rest of the conveniences that are expected in the 20th century.
Our film is about the changing American city in the post-war years, and so it's filtered through what became a notorious public housing project in St. Louis. St. Louis changed quite a bit. Its population declined drastically. Deindustrialization, all the major factors that led to the decline of the post-war American city are present in Pruitt-Igoe.
Pruitt-Igoe project in St. Louis is a casebook example.
And when many people discuss Pruitt-Igoe, they often discuss it in terms of an architectural failure, as something that failed because of the style of architecture that it was built in. Architects have often discussed Pruitt-Igoe in this way to kind of create this sense of Pruitt-Igoe as this iconic place, as something that really can be identified with the modern movement. And so if this fails, then the modern movement of architecture failed as a whole.
It was a powerful story with a dramatic end. The footage was replayed again and again. One image seemed to sum up the infamy. It circulated worldwide. It was reprinted next to photos from earlier years and suggested a simple question. What caused the failure? The Pruitt-Igoe myth begins here.
And so that's the initial myth, but we kind of broadened it in our analysis. And, we're also talking about how public housing is often viewed as a failure because it is public housing, because it's federal housing. People tend to blame the government. Or people tend to look at Pruitt-Igoe as a failure because of the residents. They say that the residents tore up this public housing project. And so these are the kind of like general myths that we're dealing with in the film, really trying to eliminate the scapegoats that have often plagued discussion of Pruitt-Igoe and public housing in general.
I know a lot of bad things came out of Pruitt-Igoe. I know they did. But I don't think they outweigh the good. I really, really don't.
We wanted to keep this story one about the experience in the projects themselves. And so from the residents' perspective is what we were really focusing on. Those are the stories that whenever you have this kind of iconic symbol, those tend to get lost. And so bringing those stories to screen and allowing and recording the residents speaking of those moments, it was really eye-opening to me.
Plenty of green grass, trees, shrubbery, and all the works.
What happened?
Well, one day we woke up and it was all gone.
In the middle 50s, St. Louis thought it had solved its low-cost housing needs, but instead a monster was created.
But things changed quickly. As problems mounted, the decline was steep. Those who could move out did.
12,000 people were originally
Rather than relying on archival footage simply for its journalistic merits, presenting like a documentary, the implosion, or news reports from the day, now all of a sudden we had documentary footage that could give a kind of texture to life in the projects. And that was something that opened up in a completely new artistic avenue for me. I don't know if St. Louis has really changed that much from the days of Pruitt-Igoe, unfortunately. In St. Louis, we were hoping that we would see an increase in the population. But in fact, the recent census figures showed that we actually went down 10% again. So this entire process is one that's continuing. Yes, there is gentrification within the city, certain parts of the city, but overall the city is still losing population. When you're thinking about public housing, you really need to put it in its I think people need to put it in its broader context in discussions of public housing. People often tend to separate Pruitt-Igoe or public housing in general from the larger urban context, the larger shifts in the American city that were taking place in these years. And that's what we were trying to get at with this film was um, getting away from trying to place blame on one particular thing, looking at it in its much broader context.
Okay, so we'll go back to our presentation. So in a broader sense, it wasn't the death of modern architecture. I mean, in that sense, but I think you get the gist of it, right? There was an issue with the housing complex, with the way it was designed, and with the people. I mean, it was overall largely a social issue, right? So, and in some sense, it reflected the signs of what was happening in the world also. That now people wanted something more specific rather than something universal. This was a housing complex designed in Missouri, in St. Louis, by an architect sitting in New York with no connection to the site. I mean, I don't know exactly how he designed it, but this was happening all over. I mean, there were projects in the US in the 70s, all over the country, and each of these projects, they became called, they started being called projects because they were these kind of projects where people would be bundled inside, and they would start living inside these complexes, and nobody would care about them. And this was starting to happen. Corbusier was building the Unité in France, and the Unité was being replicated other places. Or large housing complexes, as we have seen, started being built in Algiers, in other places, and this kind of modernism was spreading everywhere. And this was starting to be seen as a problem. And part of the problem was architecture, part of the problem was other things also. So both together uh, started becoming a problem. And the answer, in some sense, was what was this other move that was happening in the world. And I mean, we'll talk about it in the end a little bit, but it was what Kenneth Frampton famously coined it as regional architecture, where architecture is understood, as being specific to a place, specific to a site, specific to the people for whom it is being built, specific to the climate. I mean, a lot of these projects were built without climatic concerns, without social concerns, without understanding the type of people, what they could maintain, what they couldn't maintain. So putting, like, the SRA buildings in Bombay right now are as bad as these projects, and they should be demolished. If and I'm sure in 20 years you will see them being demolished, because they put people who are used to living on the ground, even in spite of the fact that they live in a 10 feet by 10 feet small hut and 5 people live in a small room like that. You put the same people on the 30th floor of a building with no light and no ventilation. There is no way that they can make it better. There is no way. So it's both the policies of the government, the architecture behind it, the architecture which is a result of those policies, social fabric, cultural fabric, all of that comes together to create this problem. And that's why this idea of creating an architecture which was regional based, which was based on the place and the people for whom it was being built, that starts to become very important. And here we see Golconda, the famous. It's actually a part of the study that one of you will be doing, I'm sure. Uh, but Raymond Antonin is a Czechoslovakian architect, and he's traveled all over the world. He works with he goes and works. He's a Czech architect who goes to America, and his wife is Naomi Antonin. They both work with Frank Lloyd Wright. Frank Lloyd Wright sends him to Japan to work on, after the First World War, to work on the Imperial Hotel. He works there for a year. Then he has a fight with Frank Lloyd Wright, and he does not agree. He gets bored working in Frank Lloyd Wright's office, in fact, and he starts working on his own. He, along with, there's another guy, I can't remember his name, were called the fathers of modernism in Japan. Okay, and something that we spoke about Japan earlier, the Meiji architecture. This other person was in fact the royal architect of the he was the official architect of the Meiji regime. I don't remember his name right now, but it will come to me. I'll tell you that name. That's he's a British architect. Okay, I know. I mean, I know. I can see his face, but I can't put the name to it actually right now. But anyway, so Antonin then stays back in Japan. He meets a lot of people, and and after that he is somehow invited to build in Pondicherry by the mother in Aurobindo ashram. I don't know how much you guys know about Sri Aurobindo and the ashram and in Pondicherry, but the mother who's really the person next to Aurobindo sort of philosophized the way of living in Pondicherry in Auroville, and she calls him, and he's first sends George Nakashima, who is so this is Antonin Raymond and his wife, uh, and they were laying a foundation of a new kind of architecture found on the principles not habits of the mind, just as in your philosophy. Uh, Aiming at the very outset for a free mind. So he's talking about a mind which is free. He's talking about an architecture which is free, which is not bogged down by any other larger principles. And this is George Nakashima, who first comes to India before Raymond, and he is one of the most famous furniture makers in the world. He's designed uh, some of the most iconic pieces, and even now, if you go to or go to um, if you go to Golconda, you will see the doors, the chairs, the tables that he fabricated, and they're beautiful woodwork. There's nobody, I mean, and he talks about it. Each flitch means a piece of wood. Each board, each plank can have only one ideal use. The woodworker applying 1,000 skills must find that ideal use and then shape the wood to realize its true potential. So Nakashima was extremely passionate. So I mean, imagine this kind of partnership where Raymond is the architect, his wife Naomi she works with she studied under design as an architect, but she then slowly gets working with Frank Lloyd at the office. Also, she was also part of the office. Uh, gets slowly interested in fabrics and furnishings and genuinely becomes passionate about that, and throughout her life, the rest of her life, her primary endeavor was to furnish and design the fabrics and the upholstery and the curtains and all of the things that are required in all of Antonin Raymond's buildings. He designed literally 500 buildings in his life in India, in Japan, in a couple of other countries where he worked. Actually, I think France also, and maybe another East Asian country. I don't remember that. So and he is now, I mean, he comes to India as a American architect, then he's Czechoslovak and goes to America, then goes to Japan, and then comes to India, and he is able to design a building which works even today superbly without air conditioning. And if you understand the contrast between the Pruitt-Igoe housing and Golconda, then you will understand. He uses in Golconda a local Kadapa stone, which is beautiful even today. If you go and visit and you see it today, so there is this understanding of when design is implemented from far away and when design is implemented locally and through an understanding of local climate, local materials. Famously, the I mean, imagine this is a rectangular plot, and he angles the building for wind and ventilation and light. And it was really something that uh, was revolutionary at the time it was designed. And these are certain images of Golconda that are famous. He's designed these kind of lures which move even today, concrete lures which are in perfect conditions. These sliding doors are designed and built by George Nakashima. The lures and the building is obviously by Raymond. You can see the black Kadapa floor, which is an extremely cheap and durable material available easily all over India. And this is, I don't know if you understand, if you see this, but this is by Bijoy Jain, by Studio Mumbai. And you can see the influence differing. I mean, you can see the influence coming from that time to today's time. And this is just, I mean, just something that I found, and I felt the similarity between the images was too much to let go and not talk about. Okay, and this is, so this is just talking, this is another, pathfinders of regionalism. Somebody who even now, John DeFazio is a famous, is quite a um, well-known writer who talks about, and he talks about right. And there is this group of people who coming out of Wright's office become pathfinders of religion, of regionalism. These architects were responding to the particular places and cultures where they were building. Their work was specific to their sites and climates. It was regional, not universal. Schindler, Neutra, and the Raymond saw modern architecture not as a zeitgeist. Zeitgeist is a very important word that I think you should all understand. Zeitgeist means a dominant mode of production or a mode of working or mode of thinking in the world where everybody is in some sense thinking through that lens. And what he's saying is that the Raymonds, Schindler, Neutra, Laurie Baker, and all the others who I will talk about subsequently were people who were thinking against the zeitgeist. And at that time in the 60s, 70s, or after the Second World War, 40s, 50s, what he's talking about, there was this new idea of a new technological society which was dominant, and that was being challenged by these people, as many of their European contemporaries theorized, but as part of human expression, one that places us fully in the world. All these factors combined as they searched for and created their own responsive modern architecture and contributed to what became known in the 40s and 50s as regionalism, in the 1980s and 90s as critical regionalism, and sustainability movement we see in global architecture today. And he's saying that these are all the same thing in some sense in the response of architects to what is happening in the dominant part of the world, in the dominant modes of production in architecture, that regionalism, then critical regionalism as discussed by um, in the 80s and 90s, and what we call as sustainability are in fact facets of the same thing. They are ways of working locally, working regionally, working on the ground and not from far away. And then there's Patrick Geddes, who against the grain again, extremely against the grain. He is somebody who's influenced by Darwin, by Comte, by lots and lots of others, famous uh, philosophers and thinkers. And he talks about, he also travels the world. He's this kind of polymath. You don't find, there are very few polymaths or people who you would call polymaths right now. And he was a mathematician, a biologist, an urban designer, an architect. He was everything all in one. He was a mentor to Louis Mumford. He has I mean, it's an amazing. If you just look at his biography and if you look at the kind of things that he did in his life, it's amazing that how many things you could do even at that time. Travel the world, go to different places when there were not, airplanes. It used to take 3 months to come to India at that time in the 20s and the 30s by boat, and to go to go to America, to go from one place to other. And even at that time, somebody is so prolific in all different things. And he is called again by the Raja of Indore. You remember last time we spoke about Indore and the palace there. He's the father of who we spoke about. He calls him to Indore and he designs this plan of Indore. And obviously, this is not the only thing that he did. He did a lot of things. He went to Baroda and he made a plan for Baroda also. Then a couple of other places in India, and he left a lot of his work behind. He did a whole book on urban development, on the future of urban development of Indore and other places. And what he says is, to be effective, action is not simply a matter of diffuse science, of intellectual knowledge, as too many still think, since we are all trained in college to be intellect idolaters. An idea has to be emotionalized to bring forth into action. Emotion is the vital spark which ignites the cold potentiality of knowledge into the flame and energy of desire, will and resolve, of purpose and deed. So he's saying pure rational intellectual thought does not do anything, because when it is imposed on something far away, it does not work. And emotion comes from being a part of the place, being there where you are going to work, what you are going to do. So so again, so this is somebody who is going against the grain, going against the largest zeitgeist of that time, and trying to talk about, you know, uh, working on the ground, understanding the ground conditions, and then, not a universal solution to things. And then there's Joseph Ellenstein, again somebody who works with Frank Lloyd Wright, comes to India, starts working here, and becomes a partner to Doshi later on, and does beautiful work. Does very. I mean, if you see some of his earlier buildings, they were as simple as the houses that we showed in Shantiniketan. And he is again somebody who's interested, extremely interested in a kind of a regional architecture which is catering to the local climate, the way people behave, the way people uh, inhabit a building. So he empathizes with the people of that place, which Corbusier, Mies, they could never do. None of the modernists could ever think of people in that sense. So he starts working at Cranbrook with Saarinen again, and he's a famous student. He's very influenced by Saarinen, but he still goes and works with Frankfurt, right? And this is Saarinen, who's again a fantastic architect. You should all know Elil and Iro. Iro is the son, Elil is the father. And Cranbrook is amazing, and all the other projects by them. I think you should all look at these buildings and understand them. The brickwork, the detailing, all of that is fantastic. But anyway, we're not talking about that. So this is Cranbrook, and this is Joseph Ellenstein when he comes to India, and he starts slowly and slowly becomes popular and starts working for the government, and he does a lot of these important buildings in Delhi. The Ford Foundation, famous, extremely famous building, and all his buildings are regional in that sense. One second. Huh? They belong to the place where they're designed. The architecture, the structure, the detailing, the kind of windows and louvers that you build, the kind of pathways within the building from access from one to the other. It's not like Corbusier where there's a 200-meter open concrete walkway from the High Court to the Parliament building, or from the Parliament building to the governor's house, and it's blazing hot, 45 degrees in Chandigarh, and he doesn't care. But Stein cares about people, how they move from one place to the other. So there are covered walkways, covered pathways, semi-shaded places, outdoor spaces, indoor spaces. So in spite of the fact that we talk about Chandigarh in that sense, Corbusier did not understand the climate in India. The brise soleil that he was invented actually far much earlier in southern France, and then he just used that in certain buildings here and not everywhere. But he used it not so much as a climatic device. He spoke about it as a climatic device, but it was not really a climatic device in India, because he didn't do anything more than that. Where Joseph Ellenstein is again, I mean, he is designing. I mean, I don't know. There is no photograph of that, but there are beautiful pictures I have. I should have put those actually. My photographs, the staircases, the jali work that he does in all these Delhi buildings. They are all fantastic, and they are all work. I mean, these buildings, even today, you can sit in the gardens or in the outdoor spaces or in the semi-covered spaces of these buildings in the heat in Delhi and not require air conditioning. And that's the way he was designing, because he was able to understand the climate. He was able to understand how people utilize those spaces, and he could cater to that. He could adapt to this kind of architecture, because he believed in architecture to be humane and not just poetic, not just sculptural. And this is Kenneth Frampton's famous book on towards the critical regionalism, which was again, there are lots of contradictions in that. And he talks about modernism and critical regionalism, and there's like a lot of refutation of critical regionalism. What is so critical about critical regionalism? Why not regionalism? And so all of that, I think that's fine. I mean, it's just something that for you to think about. And just as an example, I want to talk about this guy, Sato Almeida. He's Goa's guru in some sense. He's a very famous local architect, not very well known. Sept has just started, or started, no, I think they already have all of his archival work. And he was somebody who was working when, already started working when the Portuguese were still in Goa. And there was a lot of Portuguese influence in some of the buildings, earlier buildings in Goa. And later on, when he started working, he uh, he spoke about things in Goa, and about how architecture in Goa uh, was not Goan in some sense, and he was somebody who understood Goan architecture. So he talks about, he worked in Doshi's office in the 60s and then returned to Goa again, and uh, he looks at Vikram Sarabhai, Albert Einstein, Rabindranath Tagore, and understands, lots of different ideologies through them. And he believed that a human architecture needed to respond to the spirit of a place, and most importantly its climate. The Goan veranda that we see at that time, what was happening in Goa also, like a lot of different places even now, the influences Bombay was very high. So earlier it was these Portuguese buildings that were being built, and at the end of Portuguese rule, apartment blocks similar to the blocks in Bombay were starting to be built in Goa. And that was in small Goan villages, in small places. And that was something that was anathema to someone like Almeida. And he was a friend to Laurie Baker, to Mario Miranda. His brother, Anthony Almeida, was a famous architect in Tanzania at that time. And I think, and his design, he worked on lots of different kinds of projects, especially some of the temples and things that he did. One second, where is this window? Okay. I keep losing this. So this is, and this is the Caramelite Monastery Church. There aren't too many photographs of this available, but this is again a building where uh, which is famous for the beautiful light that it gets inside. I don't have a picture of that. I've been trying to get a picture of that, but I'm not able to get one. And very famously, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, I don't know if you heard this name, one of the founders of Bauhaus, visited this much later. And he spoke about this also, this building also, and the quality of light that you get inside this building. So he does, this is a mutt, a Hindu mutt, for priests and sadhus living there. And he designed this building in Goa. Um, and he designed this, all of the things that he did, he was bringing some kind of a local flavor back to the architecture of Goa, going away from modernist principles, what was already starting to happen in Bombay. At the time that, once he spoke about something where, uh, before the advent of flats, okay, apartment buildings in Goa, every single person in Goa had a house, even if it was a mud house, and land. And it's only when these kind of apartment buildings started being built, then slums started happening in Goa. So he understood Goa and Goan architecture in a way, and he modified and changed Goan architecture. And this is obviously Laurie Baker and his famous buildings, which are also built through local networks, by local people, by local artisans. He understands brick and people. I mean, he famously asked, what I don't know, did we whether we spoke about it, but the way Buckminster Fuller asked, what is the weight of your building? He asked, what is the cost of your building? And he would always say that if my client has 100 rupees at that time, I will build a building in 100 rupees. He will not say that, no, I will need this much money, otherwise I can't work. And his house itself was also designed as an incremental thing. He would help His clients build very differently through local materials, through a collective of people who would help. Most of the times his structures were built not by professional contractors but by the owners themselves. He would design and help them and teach them, and they will build the house themselves. And he was hands on always, partly doing the work. And I mean, he came to India again through a very sort of strange route, going to North India first, where and he worked as a leprosy, not a doctor, but he was helping people in a leprosy center there, and then later on decided to settle down in Kerala. And this is one of his famous, not a student, but by one of the fewer Indian architects, very highly influenced by him. And we spoke about Gautam Bhatia also last time, where he understands Indianness and Indian sensibility of Indian architecture in the IGNCA competition. And these are a couple of his buildings um, built in India. I mean, the fantastic buildings that reflect a sense of an Indianness, a sense of being a part of the country, and it's not Indianness by in a very simplistic or a literal manner by saying, okay, I repeat an arch, I do carving on my buildings, or sculpture or things like that. But there is a sense of understanding the climate, understanding movement of people, understanding material, understanding ways of building and things like that. This is our till recently, one of the what do you say? What was his position, Rutika? One of the
He was a director, no?
not a director, but for our
In
college, no,
architecture.
no,
For
a
us, our
chair,
college,
a
yeah,
chair. He was a chair. He was the chair of
design.
architecture. Design chair, yes, in
Yeah.
our college. And again, somebody who builds fantastic buildings, very local, very baroque in a sense. I mean, obviously it's not baroque in the traditional sense, but very mannerist actually. His buildings are very mannered in the sense that they're very uh, layered, lots of different layers, and he will create this almost as if it is built slowly by hand with the trees and the landscape around it.
Yeah. Two of them are in our list, Nimish.
Yeah,
One is
yeah.
he and one is Khamir. Khamir also is there.
Khamir also. There's a picture of Khamir also here actually.
Yeah, beautiful.
So yeah, so you have to understand that these fall in this category of not there. We see, and the thing is, I started by saying the death of modernism, but these are also very modern buildings. There is a sense of modernity in these buildings also. They are regional, but this is a new sense of modernism. It's not regional by repeating or imitating the architecture of 200 years ago. It is still using modern techniques, modern materials, or reinterpreting traditional techniques and traditional materials. There is a sense of modernity in the design, in the plan of these buildings. They are not literal imitations. What used to happen earlier, when you would design a famous building like VT Station. VT Station is not a it's a beautiful example of Victorian architecture, but it's not a reinvention of Victorian architecture. Do you understand the difference? That what is modern is why these are modern. I mean, these are all the buildings that I've shown. Even Laurie Baker's buildings, Almeida's buildings, all of these buildings are modern. A building like this is very modern because it is a reinterpretation in today's time of something that of the ethos of earlier architecture, and using today's time, today's technology, today's means, and thinking about them. Why is, I mean, that's why that's why I start from a very modern building, which is the Golconda, and I'm talking about all of these different kind of buildings. And although we say death of modernism at the beginning, it is in some sense a rebirth or a continuation or a change in the ideas of modernity, but they are still modern. And this is again Hunnar Shala, which is doing fantastic work in Kutch and Bhuj and lots of different places. And it is famously an organization not of architects but a lot of different people who come together as a collaboration and start doing innovative things, both as architecture and as social entrepreneurs, using traditional knowledge but reinterpreting it. Something that I think a lot of you should, who are interested in something like this, should try and approach them for your internship. I think an internship with Hunarshala will change the way you think about architecture. And they do take interns. So that's it. I mean, I again the same. The idea of the whole of all these talks is this, that cross history, that meeting different things at the same time, bringing them together and talking about them is how we understand architecture.
But
Okay.
Nimish, one curious question.
Yeah.
When talking about critical regionalism, I didn't see any examples of Korea. What do you think about it? I mean, because we think that he's also one of the sensitive architect who kind of tries to get regionalism a lot in his architecture. So,
One of the reasons I did not use Korea in the whole presentation is because I can never think of Korea as a regionalist architect.
okay.
I mean, I think he is regional in the sense that, I mean, he is amazing in his understanding of the Indian ethos, but I think he, I don't know. I mean, I would imagine, I don't know. I can't put him in the same category as, let's say, Laurie Baker or Neelkant Chaya or somebody, because they adapt to the conditions where they go. Whereas Korea has still a dominant, I mean, that's why Doshi is not there. That's why, because there is still a larger dominant idea of architecture which supersedes any place they build. So Korea would build, he will understand the climate, but whether he builds in Bhopal or in Goa, there is a sensibility which remains more dominant.
Hmm. Okay.
So to me, it is not, I mean, it is regional if you look at it at the world scale, but we are already, I mean, talking about, let's say, building in Delhi and Kashmir, then time changes stuff. Or Almeida, who builds only in Goa in some sense, or Laurie Baker, who builds in bricks for the local people of Kerala also. So there is a, I mean, I think, uh, I don't know, maybe I should add that as a counter or as a slightly different kind of regionalist approach also. Maybe we can do that. Maybe we can do
Yeah.
that. But I mean, I didn't think of Korea, putting Korea in this group of people in some sense, because Korea Doshi are always so largely represented everywhere in some sense that
Correct.
maybe that is also the reason. But I think you're right. Maybe Korea should be a part of this.
No, I mean, it just was a question because I was introduced to this whole term of critical regionalism only because of the forward written by Kenneth Frampton in Korea's book. Because that
I know, yes. So
Korea's
to
book
me,
is
that is
something that we read as a Bible, like we did in our
correct,
undergrad. Then
correct,
that's
correct.
how the whole this concept of critical regionalism, then and knowing Kenneth Frampton kind of started from there. So
Yeah,
and also when you rightly said that that's why Doshi is also not there. But somehow I don't know, as you say that we have our own kind of understanding or maybe biases. I never see Doshi into it. I mean, for
yeah,
me, little bit less kind of. He's more poetic, more conceptual, more conscious about the spatial kind of experiences. But I think when where Korea stands, it's more about knowing the place also. Like for instance, again, this whole concept of critical regionalism, uh,
hmm,
not necessarily like what you showed. So C is a different case and Khamir is a different case. If I go
correct,
back to
correct, correct,
Chaya, so for me,
right,
C
correct.
is also represents both. It also represents the whole notion of or a basic language that modern architecture also followed, and also the regionalist approach or a very these humble kind of spaces which are flowing and inclusive spaces what we say, or the very famously what Doshi talks about SEP, that it's an open campus, it's an inclusive
Yes,
campus, right?
yes,
So but
yes,
Khamir has a very different connotation wherein in a first look wherein it gives me this whole what you say image of a vernacular architecture. So what
correct,
is
correct,
that
correct, correct.
what is that line, or what is the difference between when we say that it is a regionalist architecture, it is a vernacular architecture, and when we say critical regionalism, does it means a mix of today's and so local material interpreting in today's way, or what exactly we mean by that. So that's why I just
So
had this
yeah,
question.
yeah, 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 yeah. No, so I think there's a difference also when you look at Vasant and Revati Kamat.
Hmm.
Okay, or maybe a couple of other people who work like that. There is a largely, I mean, in my mind, okay, although others may differ, but their work is largely a repetition of older styles and older ways of working. Whereas Khamir, because why Khamir is better, than let's say the tribal museum in Bhopal by Revati, is because Khamir is a genuine reinterpretation of
Hmm.
traditional architecture.
Hmm.
And I think that is why it is vernacular but modern.
Hmm.
And to me, that fits well within. And that's, see, I mean, I think one of the problems with this term critical regionalism or regionalism is also that you cannot categorize it. And if you, the minute you start categorizing or putting it in these kind of brackets, no, then
Hmm.
it becomes very sad. I feel that
Ah,
it,
okay.
it just gets bracketed within that, and then you can't think about it beyond that kind of putting it in this inverted commas that this is this. I think it's more than that, and that's why I don't know. I mean, even I don't have a term for what we should use for these architects actually, and that's why we talk about it as, and that's why I mean, so to me it's more regional architecture, regionalist architecture than critical regionalist or vernacular or traditional architecture, I think. And so the way I would see traditional architecture or vernacular, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to rephrase that. I'll have to think about that.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I just mean that when, like, with respect to image or a visual, when we go with a very visual kind of notion,
Right.
Amir
Uh-huh.
gives more as, kind of goes more towards Varnak or these Varnak language that is there.
Correct.
Maybe because of
Correct.
the material palette, or because not, I'm not saying with respect to the sloping roof or anything, but I think it's majorly because of the material palette. What
Material palette. Correct. Correct.
because
Correct.
even if you see the spaces, they are not the traditional spaces that are there. They are very
Hmm.
the spaces are very contemporary, with which are kind of designed with respect to today's technological advancement of whatever the carpenters use and whatever. So they are not that you
Hmm.
have to sit on the floor and do. They are all well equipped. So I think it's also with respect to that material palette. So I don't know. Somehow I kind of always I'm confused with this notion. I'm still not able to clearly understand this notion of critical regionalism, wherein what exactly because in every architect it is seen in a very different.
Different form, different. That's
Yeah,
why I think I always feel that this idea is very vague, and this is something that in some sense we all do, but we all do it in. So I don't know. I mean, I think we. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't know the answer to this
yeah.
actually.
If you even have seen NID, so NID and
Yeah.
it has.
Yes, very critically
Yeah,
regionalist in that sense.
yeah.
I think that NID is a fantastic example of modern but regional also. It has a very modernist sensibility, much more, let's say, than Khmer or
Hmm.
some of and or even um Laurie Baker's work, but it's more like Stein's work actually. But
Yeah.
even then, even more than Stein's work, it is still much more modern than Stein's work
Hmm.
also. I think I mean there's a but similar but largely similar to Stein's approach, that it is modern but it is regional in the sense it treats climate and windows and cross ventilation and certain things as very important in the design process.
Yeah, because NID is very dynamic in a sense, because I feel it's a collage of these different spaces, because at some point you feel it's a very Miesian space wherein when
Yes.
these binary numbers are written, if you know that courtyard where
Yeah,
these
yeah, yeah, yeah.
numbers are written, if you go to the auditorium and you see the detail of the windows there that exist, it's very those are those wooden lower windows. You have that mechanism which is there in the middle. You have that vertical bar and you kind of pull it up and down with that. So NID is
Correct.
a very kind of a dynamic example. I mean, like how sept is very predictable. You know what it
Hmm.
maybe for us, or maybe we've been there so many times. I've been in the campus. That's why we know what is going to happen. But even if you visit NID, every time there is this different experience that the space gives. Maybe it's also because there were multiple architects who were involved in NID, no? And
Right. Yes.
I think the conception also happened by Charles Ray and Eames, which also had a lot of influence. So it's actually
They were
NID.
very influential. Yeah. NID is an amalgam of lots of different ways of thinking actually together.
But anyway, what others think? Every time we
What
end
do
up
you?
having a dialogue. What
So I know somebody. I don't know whether this where I heard it, but it was a very funny thing. Somebody who's trying to take admission at SEPT, and the parents go and visit the college and they say, "अरे plaster भी नहीं है building को उधर थोड़ी admission ले सकते."
True. No, it happens. It happens.
उनके पास प्लास्टर करने का भी पैसा नहीं है ऐसे बिल्डिंग में थोड़ी बड़ा पढ़ने को जा सकते
I know. It totally happens with all many of us, I would say.
हैं.
Okay, any thoughts, any comments?
I'll just come 1 second. Huh?
Yeah, sure.
Hold on.
Or any of you have visited any building, Mohit? Perfect amount of ornamentation be called as critical regionalism? Well, we don't know. We need to kind of have your own answers for this, Mohit, actually. So, any form of architecture with highly climate responsive, it's not necessary to only be highly climate responsive now. So a building with so like for example, it is said Suzlon North by Christopher Charles Benninger, though it has received these lot of ratings and is said to be very climatically perfect, self-sustainable, because in the whole campus you have your own systems running in through which the building kind of functions. But I don't know whether it kind of responds to this whole aspect, the regional aspect, when in terms of spaces and also in terms of scales. So I think it comes with both. It comes with also the way you design it, that also comes with respect to scales, proportion, kind of spaces which are there, and also with the kind of systems that are set. So Mohit has a question, Nimesh, if you would like to respond.
Okay, 1 second. Wouldn't any form of architecture with highly climate responsive design and just the perfect amount of ornamentation be called critical regionalism? Yeah, I mean, I can call anything critical regionalism.
No.
I mean, without ornamentation, Rutika was just mentioning Charles Correa. He does not do ornamentation. It's still critical regionalist, right? So I don't see. I mean, I think. See, these labels are very funny. We use labels to talk about these, but it there are so many points at which the labels break down and then don't work. I know so many good architects who are not well known at all and whose works are fantastic, much better than all these famous architects, and much more suited to the local climate, to the local concerns, to local materials, but they're not great architecture. And that's fine. I don't think all architecture. I think he says no somewhere in the presentation today. I said that no, that architecture does not have to be architecture does not have to be great every time, but it has to be good. Because every building can't become a great building. Every building is not going to be put in history books or famous books or big books, and photographed and done that. You still have to be good in terms of how you treat the people in that building, how you design for them, and how you make them comfortable in that building. And to me, that is much more important than any of these labels or any of these things. And it's not something to be to try and achieve. I mean, I don't think I have anyone who works tries to. I mean, maybe there are people who do that, who want to call their building critical regionalist building or their practice critical regionalist. I mean, you can talk about Bijoy Jain. I showed a photograph of that. Anupama Kundu just won a very important prize actually. Her work is very critical, very regionalist, but very modern also at the same time. So, but there is no formula. See, Mohit, I think what you are saying, if I use a particular formula, can I become this kind of building or can I become that kind of building? I don't think it's like that. And I don't think you should try to want to be like that also. I think every building has to be approached in the way it needs to be approached.
True. And also, the kind of when you say ornament, it's a very important and a very critical word. Okay, so ornament, what exactly you mean by ornament? What does it define? Is it ornament something that has to be true to its material, or it is something that makes a material to gain its real expression, or what? I mean, even I can say a simple concrete building is a very ornamented building because it just kind of exemplifies the true expression of that particular material, that is concrete. Okay, even Tadav Ando's building, I can say, so ornament for Tadav Ando's building is those typical formwork kind of finishes that he has. So that is also an ornament. So here, that's why I said, this term of critical regionalism is never very clear. Even if you hear Frampton, his lectures, if you hear, there are lots of lectures available. There are good lectures of A, wherein Frampton talks about critical regionalism, but he also will never give you a exact amount of, this has to be there. For every architect, he kind of describes it in a very very different way. Of course, one something that is not critically regional is that we can always see, like Nimish gave an example of Corbusier. I really don't see him in any way being a regionalist. He has these weird concepts wherein the idea of those gargoyles and those water spouts, actually those were picked up from Rajasthan, where the whole idea was that so one will have a question that why in Rajasthan you have these water spouts, because it's a desert. So but that's what the logic was, that the water spouts were there because whenever it rains, the water falls and you celebrate that. Yeah, you collect it and you celebrate that. So it was more of a symbolic and a functional both aspect, and he just got it from there and put it almost in everywhere in his architecture. Like even in Ahmedabad, sorry, not in Chandigarh, it was more kind of scaled up and more kind of put in a different way. But the logic was that even if you see his sketches which are there for Chandigarh, which are just these mountains and cattle grazing, so I find it very weird, though he was a very radical architect, and a lot of things are actually kind of based upon his manifestos. But there are these certain kind of ways, expressive ways, so you can actually tell that okay, this is not something that belongs to critical regionalism. So sometimes you can actually point it out very explicitly that no, but it's not. Many times it's very debatable. Like I was talking about Suzla on Earth, the Christopher Charles Benninger building. I don't find it I don't find it a critical
I
regionalist,
think it's
though.
horrible. I think it's horrible.
Yeah, though it is climatically sound, or systems wise it is sound, it is self-sustainable to some extent. But I don't like the way the building kind of comes and overpowers you, because there are certain things wherein you will find so funny, that there's this, at the entrance there's this globe. They have brought it from the US or somewhere, made up of some kind of material. So I was like, how much energy and money you are spending
Is
on getting
wasted in that.
picture,
Yeah,
and then you're making
exactly.
so yeah, so that kind, it depends. I mean, sometimes the building is quite glorified. Some of the spaces are very beautiful in that building, though, but I don't, though it is claimed to be critical regionals, but it is not. So I think yours.
Benny, I think except for the first one or two projects out of Benninger's office, there is nothing critical or regional about Benninger's work.
I think
Very
the
little
yeah, Mahindra College somewhere kind of.
somewhere, but by Mahindra College also the stone is used very superficially,
Mm.
not genuinely in the sense that it should be used. Or yeah,
You can unmute
okay.
also, Mohit. We
You
just
can talk. I mean,
talk.
we just. I would like you to talk rather than just put your comments in the
Anyway,
chat box. Anybody else? Yeah. Today less people, no, only 53.
many people left.
Acha, they left. Okay.
No, yeah, 50, 60.
7 plus 6, no, 63 people are there right now.
Then there are the same amount of people. No one left, I feel. Yeah.
Any more questions? Anything else?
Hi, Nimish, Sarth here. So, when you talked about Christopher Benninger and the whole thing, I remember seeing a post on. So, there's a page on Instagram called as SEP Today, which is a students' page where those students are actually unhappy about the things going on in college and stuff like that. So they've pasted this one video where Christopher Benninger has redesigned some part of the campus, and what is done is to match with the original style of the design of the entire campus. What is done, he's added gargoyles, but the gargoyles, so actually they don't have water coming out of them. It's just like an addition, like something that is glued over there.
Correct.
I know.
I
Seen that video. Yeah.
It has come to all of us. So that's the thing, sometimes what happens is in trying to become something or trying to fulfill a label, you do things which are not genuine, right? I mean, and if you relate it back to what we discussed earlier when we talked about the Capitol complex, the original designed by Lutyens and Baker, and the kind of conflicts that they both had when Baker was trying to impose chhatris and arches and certain Indian elements on top of the Lutyens buildings. That was in some sense a similar ornamentation, no? And the debate was similar between them. Lutyens didn't care about it, and he wanted to design it his own way. And Baker thought that we have to give some credence to India, some credence to Indian architecture, some kind of create a relationship. That was a language issue. This is a climate issue. This is a very different issue, but the manifestation is the same. Whether you put something for the sake of doing it, just to create a language, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. I mean, I think Herbert Baker's interventions made the the Rajpath and the buildings are a little bit better in terms of the way they were perceived by people. As sort of the image of Indian democracy, after independence. But the gargoyles by Benninger don't work at all, and they're idiotic. I mean, they're really bad. And I mean, there is a lot of stuff that happened, in SEPT. I think it's very controversial how Benninger got the project. His presentation on the library was really, criticized by everybody. There were lots of comments, and there was lots of stuff that happened actually. So it was very controversial. It is very controversial the way it has happened and lots of stuff like that, and the design and things like that. So yeah.
Rather than a controversy, I find it quite funny this happening to an architecture college campus.
Yes.
It would have been any other institution. It would still have been ठीक है चलता है कर दिया. But on top of that, you're doing that to an architecture college.
No, forget architecture college. If it were to happen to an architecture college somewhere else, also I would understand it, because in a lot of places, architecture colleges, they don't understand what is architecture. But to happen in SEPT is amazing. I mean, it is just impossible. If you would think of SEPT 20 years before, this would not have happened. There was too much. I mean, they used to listen to the students. They used to listen to criticism. They would accept certain things and they would modify things. But now even SEPT has become top heavy. So a lot of things happen and you don't have a say in that. I don't know. Anyway, this is a little bit a discussion which we should not be having while it is being recorded and all that. So let's move on to something else. But you're right. This should not have happened in SEPT. Anything else? Others, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I think we should have more questions. No? I mean, today was very simple and clear, I think. And I think something that is close to everybody. And I think a lot of people will, in your thesis, use this ideas, use ways of working which were similar. I don't know. I mean, I think it was something that
Yeah, a
should
lot
be
of
there.
immediate examples also. So I think that. Okay, but I think this question of critical regionalism is interesting. Maybe you can start reading or finding your own answers about it. So you can develop a certain kind of position on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think if there's nothing else, then we can end.
Yeah. Nimish, can we meet for
Yeah,
5?
we can do that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. In a couple of minutes, you want to do it directly or on this only? Let the students go and continue this.
I'll call you. I'll call you.
Okay, you call me. I'll keep my teams on.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.